Hello everyone, my name is David Witten, and in this video I want to examine if ChatGPT can do data science. Now, my intuition says no, but I'm really interested to see what we can do with a little bit of a back and forth conversation. So let's get into the video. So let me just introduce the problem. I did this data science project. It was probably over 4 years ago at this point, and it was really all about Kickstarter data. So essentially these crowd-funded projects. And really what I tried to figure out is, hey, what elements are important for project success? We want these to be things where it's not known, where it's known beforehand. So, for example, one of the features of the column was how many backers the project had. Well, that's obviously going to be heavily correlated with whether it was actually successful, but you're not going to know that before the project, so that's the type of thing we want to throw out. So I'm going to talk about the data slightly, and then we'll get right into my conversation with ChatGPT and seeing what it came up with. So there are a few things I did to kind of make it a little bit more challenging, or to actually like focus on challenging projects. So the first thing was I only looked at projects with targets over 1,000 USD. And that's just because things under 1,000 USD were just very likely to be successful. And obviously like your amount matters a lot for how successful you're going to be, but I kind of wanted to look into other factors that would be important to actually determining success. There were actually quite a few duplicates in the data, despite this data set already being cleaned slightly, so that was kind of a surprising thing. And then the other thing I decided to do was projects a chance to succeed. So that means that the deadline came after the last date of a project, which is kind of like where the data cutoff happened. Then I would just throw that out because it didn't really have a chance to succeed. So anyways, I went through, I did a bunch of exploratory data analysis. I won't get into the details too much here. And then I eventually built some machine learning models with this tuned light GBM model being the best, and had a ROC AUC score of approximately 0.75. So I am pretty sure I can get ChatGPT to beat that, but it's just going to be a question of how much prior knowledge I really need to make that happen. So let's get into the conversation. I told it I want to perform some analysis on this file. It's located on Kaggle. It's already been partially cleaned, but it probably needs more. And I want you to build a simple machine learning model to predict binary state, which is whether the project is successful or not. And I asked it to code this in Python and walk me through it step by step. First, it had issues connecting the data, so I just attached the CSV. And this is the really interesting part. So the first really interesting part. So it tells you the data pre-processing that we might want to do, like EDA and stuff like that, and model building, model evaluation. Well, whenever it actually wrote the code, it completely just threw out any EDA or anything like that. So I don't know if it was doing that behind the scenes or it just kind of skipped over that. So it found columns with misvalues, which is good. It's something that you definitely want to do if you're doing your own data science project. So that's definitely a good sign. It converts categorical variables using one-hot encoding, which is fine for this project. We don't want to make it too complicated. Other options, of course. And we'll choose features that are likely to influence success of a Kickstarter project. So it includes backers count, which means its model is gonna perform really well. But this is the type of stuff we want to throw out in the future. Days to deadline, I don't really like that either, because I want this to influence people's decisions whenever they're starting their Kickstarter projects, not after it's already in place. Because obviously, if there's fewer days to deadline, you're probably more likely to have completed your goal. Let's see what else. And it uses a random forest classifier, which I think is just fine for this type of problem. It's a pretty good choice. So I helped it a little bit with the code. Just wanted to see what it said. And I wanted it to go to the ROC AUC score and log loss metrics. So it recoded that. So here I am having to help it out a little bit. I'm saying I'm concerned the projects aren't unique and that is boosting our scores. Could you help me out with that? So then it of course updates the code and drops duplicates in the subset ID. In my particular project, I actually made sure that I was dropping earlier versions of the project rather than later versions. I honestly don't think it probably will affect the results of this that much, but it's a good practice to actually figure out which duplicates you should be dropping, because obviously these lines weren't exactly the same, and I verified that whenever I did this years ago. So I would say this is a kind of nitpicky, but it is an error. So then I have to clarify a little bit more, and this is why it's really important to be very explicit with your prompts. Like you need to tell it exactly what you do and what you don't want, but of course you're going to need prior knowledge to actually figure some of this stuff out. So, and this is one of the reasons that I think it's going to be quite a while before there's an LLM data scientist. It doesn't quite work for this type of project. So I'm saying this is good, but I want the model to help people starting a Kickstarter. We wouldn't know the backer count beforehand. Could you remove this feature and add in a few other features? So I'm just curious if it can come up with any additional features. It comes up with a really, I would say, dumb one. It's the goal amount divided by the number of days to deadline. Well, one, I don't like that it has the days to deadline in there. And two, this is kind of a, I mean, I guess if your goal is really big and there's a few days to deadline, like it's going to be pretty unlikely, but this isn't actually useful for helping someone maximize their Kickstarter success, because this is always it's going to be a factor later on after you've already launched the project. So obviously I'm not going to like that, so I'm going to have a few more suggestions for it. I don't like using days to deadline because it changes over time. I want to help people at the beginning of a project make their project successful. Could you remove goal per day and days to deadline as features? Could you also add a few new features such as the number of days to meet the deadline? And so this is one where I'm like, this feature seems really important, and we know it at the beginning. You can set your own deadline. 30 days was by far the most common. It was probably like the default, but you can change it, or at least you could back then. So now we're actually starting to get closer to something real. But I have a few more suggestions. So this is just in terms of data cleaning stuff that I figured out earlier, but I had to really dig into the data and think a little bit deeper about my project in order to actually understand these things. So this is something like, this is such a multi-faceted problem. Like it's really hard for ChatGPT to figure out every possible thing they might want to do to the data. So I said, projects need a chance to succeed. Can you remove projects where the deadline date is after the last project submitted? So it does that. I think I'm gonna have another suggestion for it here. So I kind of wanted to challenge it a little bit more, like I challenged myself earlier in the project, because I really want to kind of get to the underlying factor. Like obviously the goal amount is going to be one of the biggest factors whether your project is successful, but at the same time, like if you're starting a new project, you need a certain amount of money. So I wanted to make sure we were only looking at the most serious of projects, which is I just classified as over $1,000. So it does that. And it actually ended up building a fairly decent model. Here's the code. And this is the light GBM model, but I want to see the one before that. Yeah, so it got an ROC AUC score of 7.658, which is a bit better than I was able to do in my other project. And after guiding it, I do think this model is at least semi-legit. So we beat it so far, but I know we can do better just because we can use a better tree model. So I'm going to suggest to it to use light GBM. So I ended up running that, and I actually got an ROC AUC score of over 0.8, which is actually a pretty significant improvement over my modeling, one of my first machine learning projects ever. So I think it's pretty cool. And there were a few, although it came up with some really bad feature engineering or calculated columns, it also came up with some pretty good ones. So there's definitely positives and negatives, and you need to have a little bit of experience to kind of parse this a little bit. So it really comes down to, would I use ChatGPT for data analysis or data science? I would say yes, but you really don't want it to do a whole project for you. You kind of want to have an idea of what you want to do. So once you first get a data set, of course you can upload that into ChatGPT and you can say, hey, I want to do this, and then it'll code that for you. And then you want to do a next step, you can say, hey, can you code this for me? But in terms of doing the whole project, like it's just not going to consider everything because there's just too much to consider, I would say, in a project like this. Other things you could do is if you get stuck or you think you just need more ideas, you can also ask it there. So let's say you engineer a few features and you're like, I feel like I could figure out a few new things. So you could give it the examples of the features you engineered and explain why you did it, and then you could ask it to create new features for you. And probably half of them will be garbage, not good at all, but the other half could actually be useful and you could get value from it. So this once again emphasizes the importance of domain knowledge, but at the same time, ChatGPT can be a powerful assistant. So that's all I've got for this video. Let me know if you liked it, and I'll talk to you in the next one.